Alright, what's up guys? Thanks for stopping by my channel. My name is John, and today I'm going to be going over how you can get a cinematic look in camera on the Sony A7 III. So keep in mind, these aren't necessarily the best settings for the camera, but they will give you a more cinematic look straight out of the camera without spending a ton of time in post-production. Alright, so let's get into it. First, I'm going to go over the basic exposure settings. So one of the things that's most commonly associated with a cinematic look is the low f-stop. So for whatever lens you may have on your camera, you're going to basically want to drop the f-stop number as low as possible. So on this lens, the Sony 24-105, it's a f4 constant, so we're going to just drop it right down to the f4. The lower the f-stop, the shallower the depth of field, which is very commonly associated with a cinematic look. So next we'll take a look at shutter speed. Shutter speed is another way of adjusting exposure. In a 24 frame sequence, which most movies use, the general rule is to double the frame rate. So 24 frames per second times 2 is 48. So in theory, you'd want to use 1/48th of a second, but this is a Sony A7 III, so the closest you can get to that is 1/50th. So that'll give you a nice motion blur, which is commonly associated with cinematic footage. Alright, next what we'll do is jump right into white balance. So this is kind of a big thing, in my opinion, is setting the white balance to a constant thing. A lot of people will run their camera auto white balance when they're out shooting, just because it always looks pretty decent. But an issue with that is that the colors will change throughout the video. So if you're shooting inside and the light temperature of indoor shifts, your shot's going to look totally different from a color perspective. So I recommend picking your white balance setting prior to shooting, and if you need to change it, stop the clip, restart, change your white balance, and jump back into it. This is going to ensure you get a consistent color profile throughout your video. So next thing we'll do is jump into your file format. So definitely the best look on this camera is the XAVCS 4K, filmed at 24 frames per second with an encoding rate of 100 megabits per second. This is going to get you the highest quality video you can possibly get out of this camera. However, if you're looking to jump into slow motion, which a lot of people also associate with cinematic footage, you can jump into the XAVCS HD setting and head over to 120 frames per second. This is personally how I choose to shoot my slow-mo. It gives you the most frames per second and the highest encoding rate. The only one that you might consider if you're trying to save file size is 60p at 50 megabits per second. Just keep in mind when shooting 120 footage, you really only want to shoot this when you know you're going to be using slow-mo. I wouldn't just shoot everything in 120 because the quality of the footage is far below the normal 4K setting. I usually try to pretty much just shoot everything in the 24 frames per second at 100 megabit per second encoding rate. Alright, so the last thing that we'll jump into is the picture profile. The picture profile is where you're going to control most of how your camera records color and highlights and shadows and all that good stuff. It's sort of like color correction and color grading, except for in camera. This is going to be where you get your cinematic look as far as colors go. So what you're going to do is jump into your menu, head over to the 12th menu all the way at the bottom and click on picture profile. I have mine set to picture profile 6, but all of these are completely customizable on Sony cameras. So to jump in and customize one of these profiles, all you do is hit right on the dial pad, and that'll take you into your custom settings. So the first thing we'll adjust is the black level. A lot of people associate really rich, deep blacks with cinematic footage. So what we'll do is take it all the way down to 15. If you notice, when you jump back up to plus 15, it raises the blacks a lot. But since we're trying to go for a nice cinematic look in camera, we will leave them at -15, and that'll drop your blacks and give you a little bit more contrast in your shot. The next thing we'll look at is the gamma. So the gamma is kind of like the contrast curve of the camera. My personal favorite is Cine 4. I think that it takes looks from Cine 1, Cine 2, and Cine 3 and is kind of like a nice medium of keeping and retaining highlight detail and shadow detail, but also giving you a nice little contrast curve in camera. So I usually jump into Cine 4, and I think that is the most cinematic look, but play around, see what you like. Everybody has a different taste for this. Personally, for my look, I go with Cine 4. So we'll jump back into black gamma. Black gamma I typically leave in the middle range. Basically, this is how harsh the shadow and highlight roll-offs are, and I think a nice middle range for a cinematic look right in camera is pretty solid, not going too far one way or the other. So basically the knee is how your camera records highlights, where it starts to compress them and flatten things out. So for me, I like to set my knee to manual and put the point at 75 and slope at +5. I can get into what these are in a later video and kind of explain more in depth what these settings mean. But based on my experience, this is how you can retain the most detail in the highlights while also still experiencing a solid amount of contrast in your in-camera footage. All right, next we'll move on to color mode. Personally, I have mine in A7III Cine. This is how your camera records colors, and I think that A7III also has a really nice look. But personally, I like a little bit more of a desaturated look, so I go with the A7III Cine. If you're going for a little bit more saturation, maybe check out the A7III. Okay, so on to saturation, what we'll do is I like to set mine at +5. Really, this is kind of based on your taste. Again, similar to the color profile. I think +5 is like a nice kiss of contrast, not too much, not too little. Gives you a really nice in-camera look. But if you're going for like a more flat look, maybe drop it down. And if you're looking for really, really vibrant colors, you can pop it up really high. It's really kind of depends on what you're shooting and what look you're going for. So below saturation, we have color phase. If you move up and down, you can kind of see as you go up, it gets a little bit warmer. As you drop down, it gets a little bit cooler. I like to go with a little bit cooler of a look, just my personal style. But whatever you're looking for, maybe you're going for a summery, warm vibe, you're going to bump it up to a higher number. And if you're going for a colder look, you might even drop it lower. Personally, I think -2 is a pretty good all-around setting. And below color phase is color depth. For a really cinematic look, I really like the super rich colors, so I set all of mine to +7. It gives you really, really beautiful rich colors right in camera, but again, play with it and see what you like. Onto detail, I usually just leave detail at 0 because since you're not working with this in post, you're not gonna have the opportunity to bring it up. But I do think when you up the detail level in camera, things start to get a little bit noisy and gross looking. So I would recommend leaving your detail at 0. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is how I get a cinematic look in camera without any color grading. So like I said at the beginning, this isn't necessarily how you maximize the camera's recording ability. However, it will give you a nice cinematic look in camera if you're not looking to spend too much time in post color grading or color correcting. Alright guys, thanks for stopping by my channel. If you enjoyed this video, it would be awesome if you would leave a like or subscribe to my channel. And if you want to see more like it, definitely hang around. Alright, later.